Welcome back. All right, so I wanted to talk about this topic today. It is kind of slow right now when it comes to trade deadline discussions. Apparently, there's not a lot of chatter between NHL teams right now either. Not a lot of sellers. And of the teams that are on this board, I don't know that any of them are going to be in a full sell. I would think Montreal will do some form of selling, but anybody else on the board, I don't think it's coming. So the Winnipeg Jets are the best team in the National Hockey League and the best Canadian team as well. 725 points percentage, 60 games played, a record of 42, 15, and 3, 87 points. But the reason for putting all these Canadian teams on the board, the reason for this discussion is question of, will one of these teams win a Stanley Cup this year? And if not, who might be on track to become that first Canadian-based team to win a Stanley Cup since Montreal in 1993? So looking at scoring leaders, and I just kept this simple. Kyle Connor, the leading scoring forward for Winnipeg, 60 games, 31 goals, 42 assists, 73 points. Josh Morrissey, the leading defenseman in terms of scoring, 59 games, 8 goals, 37 assists, 45 points. Hellebuck and Comrie, the tandem for this team. And right now, the Stanley Cup odds have Winnipeg at plus 1,100. So it is the second best number on the board. It is behind Edmonton. So Edmonton's still seen as the favorite. They are still seen as the favorite. I talked about that during the break and how I felt like, yeah, Edmonton's the favorite. And I don't think a 5-game losing streak means a lot when it comes to the fact that, we're at least 6 weeks away from getting into the playoffs and what could happen there, 6 to 7 weeks away. So Winnipeg's in an interesting position because they really kind of have to prove themselves. The weird thing to me is Carolina still has really good odds too. And I don't think Carolina's proven a lot either. They've been out in the conference final, which is further than Winnipeg's been since 2018, but still. The Winnipeg Jets probably not getting the amount of respect that they deserve, and they're going to have to win a couple of rounds at the very least in the playoffs to get that. Then you got Toronto, 58 games, a record of 36, 20, and 2, 74 points. Their 638 points percentage is 5th overall in the National Hockey League. Now, we talk about Toronto plenty. I don't do videos specifically on Toronto often, although there will be one on the quarter century series when I get there. Mitch Marner, the leading scorer amongst their forwards, 57 games, 18 goals, 55 assists for 73 points. Morgan Riley on the blue line, the leading scorer, 58 games, 7 goals, 23 assists, 30 points. And one thing that, we talk about here and there with Toronto is they don't really have that go-to guy that a lot of Stanley Cup winners have. Vegas's blue line was fantastic from 1 through 6, but there were a number of really good defensemen there. And while I like Morgan Riley, I don't know that they have that minute-munching, like Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes type defenseman, which you need come playoff time to get you to that next level. Now, their goaltending tandem, Wall and Stolarz, unproven in the playoffs as well. I'm a big fan of Stolarz in particular. Their Stanley Cup odds currently at plus 1,300. So they've been good. The Stanley Cup odds reflect that they could be better and that maybe some people are just not feeling it for Toronto this year. It does feel like their odds are longer right now than they've been in some of the previous seasons, but I totally get it. I absolutely understand. Then you got Edmonton. 59 games, a record of 34, 21, and 4, so 72 points. 610 points percentage, that's tied for 9th in the National Hockey League. Their leading scorer amongst forwards is Leon Draisaitl, 59 games, 44 goals, 44 assists, 88 points, and he is seen as the favorite to win the Hart Trophy. I find no argument against Draisaitl for the Hart Trophy. Others will, though. Comment section, do your thing. Evan Bouchard, the leading scoring defenseman, 59 games, 9 goals, 36 assists, 45 points. People will say, well, he doesn't play defense very well, but his offense is fantastic, and I think Bouchard's defense, while it's not elite or anything, I think sometimes people overstate his defensive issues. And then in net, you have Skinner and Pickard. And this is a tandem that people have concerns about, and yet this is still the favorite. Around the National Hockey League, this is the favorite to win the Stanley Cup at plus 650. And when I was putting this board together and looking it up, there are some sites that say it's kind of odd that Edmonton's gone through this 5-game slide, and there are questions about their goaltending, and yet the betting seems to still be towards the Oilers potentially winning their first Stanley Cup since 1990 this season. And I would be glad to see a Canadian team win that Stanley Cup, so if Edmonton wins it, Edmonton wins it. Now, Vancouver, they have one more point than Calgary, but they're 1 percentage point behind. Calgary when it comes to points percentage, but still, because the overall numbers, they're ahead of Calgary. They're here. 59 games, record of 27, 21, and 11 for 65 points. Their leading scoring forward is Connor Garland. 59 games, 16 goals, 21 assists, 37 points. Garland, of course, has had a really, really good season, and I'm glad that he has had the kind of season he's had, because there are some forwards. I know Pettersson gets all the blame for it. He's not the only forward that's been kind of cold. And when you look at this lineup, you look at that forward group, it doesn't really bring fear, I don't think, for any teams around the NHL when you're going against the Canucks. Quinn Hughes is the leading scorer overall, but on the blue line, 49 games, 14 goals, 46 assists, 60 points. He is the most important player on the Vancouver Canucks. Although you will notice I didn't include Demko in the tandem, because Lankinen and Shelovs, it looks like, are the tandem now, and there's already talk about, hey, this is probably going to be the tandem next year, that we can't rely on Demko anymore. And so when people say, well, we should trade Demko, who's taking Demko? It's a $5 million cap hit, and he's injured. And there's good reason to think that Demko may never be a regular goaltender in the National Hockey League. He may play a few games here and there, but there's some belief that his injury status is going to stay as it is. And I just don't see a team calling about his availability. Now, playoff odds, plus 5,000 for Vancouver. Yeah, that's about right. I don't see a Stanley Cup in the Canucks' future. And if all of this dysfunction that's going on, and there's still some dysfunction there, it's not as loud with the dysfunction now. I think a lot of it, there's a lot of stuff in the media, and I think there's a lot of fans that are just irritated and agitated. So there's a lot of that. But while things might be a little more harmonious in the locker room, it hasn't translated to results on the ice consistently enough as of yet. That being said, Quinn Hughes is the second in terms of favorites to win the Norris Trophy. Cale Makar listed first and Zach Werenski listed third. That is very likely to be the top three defensemen once we get to award season in June. And then we'll get to see who wins the Norris Trophy at that point. Calgary, 58 games, 28, 22, and 8 records, 64 points. They're .552 points percentage, 16th in the NHL, ahead of Vancouver's .551, which is 17th in the National Hockey League. Now, on the Calgary front, Huberdeau, their leading scoring forward, 58 games, 22 goals, 21 assists, 43 points. He's never going to live up to that contract, but he's been a good forward for them, and he's played really, really well recently. Mackenzie Weegar, 58 games, 6 goals, 26 assists, 32 points, leads their defenseman in scoring. He's had a good year too. So we talk about the Tkachuk trade because he wouldn't extend his contract with Calgary, but I think Weegar and Huberdeau have been pretty good. And again, I know Huberdeau's not lived up to his contract necessarily, but that's fine. In net, they have Wolf and Vladar. We'll see if Vladar sticks around beyond this season or if they make some change there. I believe he's on an expiring contract. That's the only reason why I say that. Their Stanley Cup odds, plus 20,000. So if you're a Flames fan and you're like, why do the Flames have so much longer odds than Vancouver? My answer to that would be simple. People wagering would look at the fact the Canucks won the division last year, that Calgary was going into a rebuild, and that would dictate how people are putting their money up, because the odds are set by how much money's being put to each team. So I think that's why the Canucks would get better odds. Not that plus 5,000 means anybody thinks they're necessarily going to do it. Just it doesn't look like anybody thinks Calgary's going to do it. Ottawa, well, Ottawa's lower on the board, but they got better odds. 58 games, 29, 25, and 4 records, 62 points. Their .534 points percentage is tied for 18th in the National Hockey League. So they have slid. They have slid badly recently, and they need to get themselves out of this slide. Now, getting Tkachuk back will help. Stützle's been good for them this season. 58 games, 18 goals, 41 assists, 59 points, and he's their leading scoring forward. Their leading scoring defenseman is Jake Sanderson. 57 games, 6 goals, 30 assists, 36 points. Ugly plus minus, but Jake Sanderson's getting the points, and he's coming off of what was a pretty good Four Nations tournament for him. In net, you have Ullmark and Forsberg. Of course, Ullmark signs that extension before the season got started. Their Stanley Cup odds are listed at plus 4,100, which is, again, better than the Canucks and better than the Calgary Flames. It is not in the same region as Winnipeg, Toronto, or Edmonton, so yeah, it all checks out. For the Ottawa Senators, they are in a position where they should make the playoffs. If you look at the remaining schedule and you look at the fact they're going to get healthier, they should. and the fact, too, that they need to. This is a team that desperately needs to make the playoffs. I would say on the same level as Detroit or Buffalo, other teams in the Atlantic Division. Then you got Montreal, 59 games, a record of 28, 26, and 5 for 61 points. Their 517 points percentage is tied for 21st. They give you an honest effort every night. They win their share of games. They also lose their share of games. They're one of the most hot and cold teams in the NHL this year. And so it will be interesting to see what they do in a week's time. I would think that Kent Hughes will be selling off Evans if they don't get him re-signed, and Armia is probably going to go as well. And so it doesn't fundamentally change Montreal going forward. Not tremendously anyways. Not that they wouldn't miss Evans and Armia, but those are guys who are potentially replaceable in the offseason, right? Now, their leading scoring forward is Nick Suzuki. 59 games, 18 goals, 42 assists, 60 points. At times, I've hyped him up greatly for his two-way play. I've kind of laid off of that now because I think everybody realizes how good Suzuki is. But he is a cornerstone for this franchise going forward, as is Lane Hutson. 59 games, their leading scoring blue liner, 4 goals, 40 assists, 44 points. So Matheson's points totals have dropped off a little bit this year. And I think part of it is Lane Hutson's getting those opportunities that Matheson got last year. Now, their goaltending tandem is Montembeault and Dobesh. Of course, Primo, it didn't work out. He gets sent down. Primo's put up very good numbers in Laval, though, so we'll see if he ends up getting a National Hockey League job soon, because there are definitely some teams who could use another goaltender. Montreal's odds, the worst on the board at plus 40,000. So if you put $100 down on Montreal to win the Cup, and they win the Cup, you make $40,000. But let's be honest, you lose $100 if you put $100 down on the Montreal Canadiens right now for this season. The interesting thing is, so coming back up to the top of the board, top down, Winnipeg's played very, very well this season. There's no reason to think that they shouldn't be able to win a Stanley Cup, but people are going to focus on the recent seasons and the fact that, really strong seasons have not translated to a good postseason. Toronto has to get out of the first round at the very least, and there's discussions about Marner and Tavares both staying. And if the core four stays and they lose in the first round again, they lost in the fourth round, that's different. That's the Stanley Cup. Although that's kind of more heartbreaking, isn't it? But if they lose in the first round again, I would say we'll see big changes, but I've been predicting that for years and it just hasn't happened. Then you got the Oilers. The Oilers, as I stated, favorites. I think the Oilers need to add on the wing. I think that's really where they need to focus. If they feel like Kane coming back, if maybe he'd be better than some of their other options, maybe you look to move money out, because I'm pretty sure they don't have the cap space to add Evander Kane back. Patrick Kane's in Detroit, but Evander Kane is in Edmonton, and I don't think they have the cap space to bring him back. That's been a discussion point at numerous times this season. Vancouver, I know Canuck fans want him to sell. I saw a poll on this today. I don't know. I'm at a point now where it just feels like I've seen this story before. That the team has a really good year and there's a lot of optimism, and then it gets cut off at the knees the following season. Sometimes it takes a few years before that really happens, but it does feel like it's happening again. It happened in 2022. They had a 2020, TOO. But in 2020 they had a good season. They got out of the first round of the playoffs as well as winning the qualifying round, and then the following season was a disaster. So this season's starting to feel like 2020, 2021 did. So we'll see how things go. Calgary, I like what Calgary's got done so far in terms of their little retool that they've been doing. They don't really need to move anybody other than maybe a pending free agent here and there. Rasmus Anderson will be the one to keep an eye on. I don't think they end up trading him, but crazier things have happened. If they have a really rough week upcoming and they decide, well, we're not going to make the playoffs, and if they don't think they can re-sign him, maybe we see that move take place. The results over the next 7 days are going to decide just how busy the trade deadline is. Ottawa, they're trending in the right direction. I would love to see Ottawa make a run at it and win a Stanley Cup. That would be absolutely phenomenal. I don't know. There's a lot of players here that are unproven at the playoff level. It just would be nice to see them at the playoff level, really. And then Montreal. Who knows? Maybe Montreal builds themselves up to a playoff team probably next season, and maybe they're the ones that get it done. Maybe Montreal, the one that won the last one in '93, maybe they win it in say 3 or 4 years, and bring the cup back north. But it should be a fun rest of the season. It's also always awesome if you get as many Canadian teams in there as possible. So we know that three of them are going to make it for sure. Likely a fourth between Vancouver and Calgary. Likely, although Utah and St. Louis are trying to mess that up. And Ottawa could very well be in the mix too. So we may end up with 5 Canadian teams in the playoffs, but it may be as few as 3. And when it's 3 out of 16, the math tells you the odds of one of those 3 out of 16 winning a Stanley Cup, it becomes very difficult. But at any rate, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe in the event you may not have done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.